All right, we're live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. Mary and I are super excited to have folks participate in this session. This is going to be a time for you to ask any and all questions about resumes, job interviews. We'll even talk about applying to jobs. Anything in that world we will talk about, and we're happy to answer any and all questions. There are no dumb questions. Curiosity is key here. So bring your questions, chat with us. We're super excited to be joined by Mary. Mary is a VP of Engineering. Thank you for being so generous with your time, Mary, and joining us here.
Of course, thank you. This is something that I genuinely enjoy and have fun doing, so I'm glad to be here.
Same. I was talking to my friend Erica. She's a career coach. We were talking earlier this week, and we just decided to go live. We're like, let's just have this conversation live about resumes because it's valuable, and people have so many different questions and opinions about resumes and interviews, and it's just kind of a never-ending topic. I feel like I could talk about it all day long. So I'm with you. Mary and I were just talking about our favorite grocery store chain. So for anybody watching live, we'd love for you to say hi in the chat and then also drop in your favorite grocery store chain just to get us started in conversation and kick us off. Mine is Trader Joe's, and I do not have one where I live now. And it was on my list of pros cons when I was making my move. And my therapist was like, I don't think that Trader Joe's should hold you back from moving back to be close to your parents for the free childcare. I was like, you're probably right. That's probably not a good enough reason not to move home, but it's up there for me. I need my Trader Joe's. So we just have to drive an hour, pack a cooler, and go to Trader Joe's.
Yeah, well, that's a whole journey.
It's a journey. Yeah, but you can call ahead. They told me you can call ahead and they'll put stuff aside for me. I'm like, I'll take 10 of your hash brown packs and 10 of your the brown sugar oat milk creamer. I'm like, just set those aside for me and I will pick them up with my Yeti cooler.
Wow. Yeah.
It's
I think I know I have a hard time picking a favorite grocery store because I shop at multiple grocery stores every time I do a grocery trip. But I think for me it is H Mart because I can get so many things there that I can't get other places, and I can get most of the things I need there that I can find elsewhere.
Yeah. It's just a staple. That makes sense. Well, if anybody joins, throughout, drop in your favorite grocery store. Let's get the chat going. But we can definitely start diving into resume questions and interview questions because I know that is what we're here to talk about. So, Mary, you're a VP of Engineering, which means you probably, interview and hire people quite frequently. The first question I wanted to ask you is, how do you intentionally design interview questions to get what you're trying to get out of them?
Yeah, I love this question because not everybody operates exactly in this way, but I have been working at startups for about a decade now. And if you're working at startups, usually you are hiring. I know that tech is not doing the best right now, but at every startup I've been at, I've been hiring. And so one of the things that you need to do is you need to be able to hire as efficiently as possible while holding a really high bar. So what I do before I open any role is I put together a job description and then I have like a document that I call a kickoff document that lists out all of the must-haves for the role and all of the nice-to-haves for the role. And essentially like lays out every skill set that you need. And then we split up those skill sets between interviewers and then have interviewers design questions based on the skill sets that we need.
Okay.
So like a good example would be if we're looking for somebody, this is a great one. My company, Keebo, works, we're fully distributed and we have, so we don't have an office anywhere and we have people in Europe. So we have like cross time zone issues. And I mean, like not issues, but like things that we have to navigate. And so one of the interview questions I ask people is, tell me about your experience with remote work. Tell me about a time that you've had to work cross time zone and what kind of like habits did you put in place or best practices did you put in place to be effective? So I try to make really specific questions that
there's an outcome that you're like,
yeah.
It's like you have an intention behind it of like, this is what I'm trying to learn from this question, and the question accurately gets at that. And it's like, it's not just a random question, just like tell me about a time, and you pull some sort of behavior out of the sky just to ask it.
Yeah. The other thing I want to make sure that I'm doing with this is I want to make sure that my interviewers are not repeating questions, because we should all trust each other to interview people
Mm-hmm.
well. And we need to get as much information out of this person as possible in like 4 to 5 interviews, because we also want to make sure that the interview process is fast so we can close people that we like really quickly.
Yeah.
And so we don't want people to repeat questions because it's like a waste of people's time. So we also line
Yeah.
up like what are everyone's questions so that we know we're not repeating.
It's something I hear from candidates too. Like they're evaluating their interview experience as part of evaluating the job. They want to work somewhere that does a good job with hiring. And if interviews start to seem redundant, they can get frustrated. And I hear them express that to us as their recruiter. You know, they're working with a recruiter as their point of contact to that company. And they'll say, you know, they asked me all the same questions in this interview. These could have been consolidated into one step. And so it's definitely great that you guys do that. And also from a timing perspective, you lose out on your best candidates if you don't hustle because they'll be off the market quick. So
100%. And most of the best, most people are not really looking. But if they are looking, they have like lots of different offers on the table.
Yes.
And so, yeah, you need to move quickly. But I will say as a candidate, if I'm getting asked the same questions by multiple people, the thought in my head is like, great, they don't have a good interview process put together.
Maybe I can help them with that if I work there.
Yeah, I was like, exactly.
This is something I excel at.
This is something I know I'm going to need to fix when I get there.
Writing that down off to the side, things to fix when they hire me. Yeah, no, for sure. I like that you outline your, I think, what did you call it, a kickoff document of the must-haves, and I think that's so important as a hiring manager for you and your team to get on the same page of what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves, because I think sometimes hiring managers can get too in the weeds on the nice-to-haves, and you really need to drill down on the must-haves. It's great that you guys outline those ahead of time and design questions for each of them. It's funny because that's so similar to my process as a recruiter. On my team, we have a matrix document that lists out all the must-haves on the left-hand side, and then every candidate we talk to, we fill out how they line up with those must-haves. So it's very interesting how our processes are similar in that way. And it's a great tool for preparing for a job interview, is taking the job description and writing out the must-haves and then outlining your experience. So that's a good tip for folks who are getting ready for interviews or getting ready to apply. Are there certain questions you ask every time that you feel like are particularly effective for hiring?
So there are certain questions that I ask every time, but I would say that it's because I am always looking for the same, wherever I go, there's like specific, actually non-technical skill sets that I think are very important. And so one of the questions I always ask is tell me about a time that you worked on a feature or project or something and something didn't go well. And in hindsight, what would you have done differently? Yeah. And the reason why I ask that question is because I'm looking for humility and a growth mindset. I'm looking for people who are able to see that something didn't go well, and instead of blaming the people around them, think, what can I do better about this situation? And then go and like apply that knowledge, because no one's perfect. No one's perfect. Everyone's going to have mistakes. Everyone's going to mess up. But the important, and especially at a startup, like most people at startups are doing something for the first time. That's like usually what's happening. And so I need people who can learn quickly and who are like lifelong learners who want to learn and grow quickly. Because I can coach anyone on anything, but I can't coach them if they're not willing to take feedback and improve.
Yeah. That's such a hard skill to cultivate too, is being willing to not take criticism or feedback personally. That's something I have to work on constantly, of when I get feedback of saying this has nothing to do with me as a human being. It's just, this is something I can grow and improve upon. My sister likes to use the phrase, good feedback is a gift. I'm sure she got that from somewhere, but it's true. Good feedback is a gift. And if you can just take a moment to look at it objectively rather than personally, that's huge for your career growth. But hard to learn for sure. I know that you have talked about this to me, and I want you to walk people through, how do you review resumes? Like, what is your step-by-step process? Because I thought it was really helpful to hear how you do this.
Yeah, and so I want to like caveat before I go into it that everybody's different, right? Everybody has their own personal preferences. When I am reviewing resumes, I often have, and I guess this is true for many hiring managers, I have hundreds of resumes to look at.
Yeah.
I will open a role and I have recruiters giving me inbound like folks, or was that inbound? Yeah, I don't know, but I forget how
Depends on if
the
they're it depends on if they're internal or external recruiters. I guess if they
yeah.
work for Keebo, then they would be inbound, probably.
Yeah. Anyway, I have recruiters that are sourcing. There we go. That are
Yeah,
sourcing for me.
that's the lingo.
But I also have people that are applying on the website. And I will say that
Sure.
like I posted a manager role a while back and I was getting like
Oh, I can't
20,
imagine. It was a
20.
remote.
It was remote. Yeah, fully remote.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I was getting like 20 to 100 applications per day.
Yeah,
And so like
easily.
I'm looking at and I want to make sure one I hate having a backlog. And so I'm like trying to get through them so I don't have a
That's
backlog.
not easy to
Yeah.
not do when you have a
But
job posted.
yeah, but two, I want to make sure that people are getting responses quickly because I know that
Yeah.
it really is unpleasant when you like don't hear back for weeks. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get through them quickly. And so I probably spend somewhere between like 30 seconds to 10 minutes on each resume, depending on like how deep it goes. And so I'll
Yep.
sort of walk through it. But so this is like my personal preference, and I'll say that other people have other preferences. What I do first is I scan through the list of titles on the resume. And the reason why is because typically, in my current company, almost every role requires some prior experience in something. So, like
Yeah.
my manager role I was hiring for requires prior management experience because I needed a more senior manager in that role. I have
Yep.
senior engineer roles I'm hiring for. They need to have been an engineer before. So the
Yep.
first thing I do is I like scan through the resume to make sure that they have any title that looks something like what I asked for. This for the manager role, this is a lot easier because I would have tons of applicants that had absolutely no management experience, and I could
Yeah.
tell from their title it was like, an associate engineer.
And that's
Uh,
gonna be 30 seconds of
and
like
I'm just
check,
like,
check,
yeah, it was
check,
like that's
check, check.
yeah, exactly done. Like you're done. Sorry, like I needed previous management experience. So I scan through the list of titles. If they don't have any title that is anywhere related to the experience I was looking for, then I reject them. Um, there's also some there. Well, yeah. So that's generally what I do. Then the next step that I do is I then look through how many jobs they've had and how long that they spent at each job. And the reason that I do that is because I um I don't want to hire someone who frequently changes jobs because then I know that there is a likelihood that they're either not a good performer and they keep getting fired, or they get dissatisfied at their job and then leave.
Yeah.
So to me, that's an indicator. Now, I will say that like to me that looks like you can I have friends of mine that are incredibly strong performers and they like spent like 5 years somewhere and then they moved to another company and they hated it and they spent like 9 months there and then they moved to another company and they hated it and they spent like
Yep.
9 months there, but then they finally found something and they stuck there for like 4 or 5 years again.
And
And
what's your
so
advice to your friend on their resume? Like, how do they get that point across so that their resume isn't perceived negatively for those 2 9-month stints?
yeah, it's a good question. If they just didn't like it, I don't know how to refer to that on the resume
Did
because
not
they
like the
just did
place.
not like this place. Because then when you say that, then it gives you like a negative,
You
like,
look like the complainer. Yeah,
yeah,
you
you
look
look
like
like
the
the
person
complainer.
who doesn't get along well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so one thing that I do know is that there's a lot of startups going out of business right now. There's a lot of startups
Yeah.
doing layoffs right now. There's a lot of startups getting acquired.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I would recommend putting on a resume is if the company went out of business, I would actually recommend putting that on your resume because
Yeah.
then it's very easy for me to understand why you were there for a short period of time. I'm not going to like I'm hiring engineers and managers. I'm not hiring like investors. Like I'm not going to hold it against you that you don't know how to pick a startup. That is not a skill set I'm looking for, right? And so if you're able to put like, hey, this company went out of business or this company got acquired, um,
Restructured.
yeah, then I would put that on the resume because then it's like, okay, this company got acquired and that is actually that's a good one that you can put on there that doesn't sound like it's complaining but still sends a good signal because like you could have left because they got acquired and the whole culture changed. And that's
Yeah.
something that like makes a lot of sense. And so I think if you can say like this, that we got acquired or went out of business, that's a really good way to just like put that on the resume so that I understand and have context. If you just say like, I didn't like this place, I feel like, yeah, there's a chance I would be like, yeah, I'm worried you just, don't like companies or you're a complainer. That can come off that way. So, but if it's like, yeah, if it's a acquisition or like company went in business, I think that's a great thing to put on there.
Yeah.
Because I know, and like I said, I know that there are situations where like you go to a company and it sucks or like it wasn't what they sold to you.
Yeah.
And so I don't hold it against somebody if they've had like one thing under a year or like two things under a year. But if I go through their resume and it's every single role they spent less than 2 years there, then I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do that makes me different than these other companies?
Yeah.
And so
you're looking for more of a significant pattern, not a onesie twosie, more so every single job they've had is under 2 years. And that to you would indicate some sort of pattern. Because this conversation is a hot topic right now. And there are a lot of people that are, kind of like your friends where they just happen to have maybe one or two experiences that just weren't the right fit, or there were layoffs, extenuating circumstances, whatever it is. And it's so discouraging when people feel like they're going to get mislabeled as a job hopper, and that's not what they are. So I'm so glad you called out to just explain some of those situations on the resume when you can.
Yeah. And then especially on a layoff, I would put it on a resume if it was they laid off the entire US team.
Yeah.
And I say that because some layoffs are actually performance based, even though companies say that they're not.
They call it a layoff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
But when they do layoffs, if they cut 50%, they're cutting the bottom 50%. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's the most expensive 50%,
Sure.
instead of the bottom 50%. But if they laid off an entire product line or an entire country, that would be a good thing to put on there, because then it signals to me I'm not a job hopper. I was laid off and it's not my fault.
Yeah.
It's like there's nothing related to my performance. They just laid off the entire US team. And as me as a resume viewer, I'm going to say, oh yeah, they just laid off all of the US.
Yeah. If you were somewhere longer than 2 years, you're there 3-4 years and you were laid off, would you just, unless you have a major gap in your resume, because sometimes people have gaps, and that we can talk about that too.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I ask somebody about their gap, they'll say, well, I was laid off and it took me that long to find another job. So sometimes they have to explain it in those situations. But let's say you were laid off and you were at a company longer than 2 years, you found your next opportunity right after that. Do you even need to get into the weeds on your resume about a layoff? Because sometimes it's like more information could be
it could be a detriment. Yeah, unless unless it's like less than 2 years or less than a year, unless
just
it's
those
like
short-term things that happen.
Yeah, then and you have a reason that is legitimate, then I wouldn't mention the layoff. You could mention company went out of business regardless. I don't think that, but I think if you see a lot of layoffs on someone's resume, then that starts to feel like a trend.
It's just everybody. Like I don't know if I've talked to anybody who's been impacted by more than 2 layoffs, but at least 2, like multiple layoffs, is becoming a trend, unfortunately. And I would say 90% of the candidates I talk to these days have been laid off, and that's sort of their main impetus for looking for a new job. So it is a tough tech market right now for sure.
Yeah. It really is.
Yeah. Hopefully that gets better. Let's see. So you were talking to me about the resume. You're looking at titles.
Yep. Then I look at like how long that they've spent in each place. Then if that all looks good, then I will say personally, because I'm at a startup, I actually start Googling the companies to see if any of them are startups, because usually I'm looking for previous startup experience.
Yeah.
And so I'll start Googling the companies if I don't recognize them already, to be like, how big is this company? Is this a startup?
That's probably where you're getting into the time intensive part.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Like this is where separate screens, like we're starting to move back and forth. That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. This is where the funnel starts to narrow.
Down.
Then I look, okay, great. Are they working at startups? Okay, great. Now, if that looks good, then I start to look at the bullet points on their resume to see if they have experience that's what I want.
Sorry to jump back to the startup experience real quick though.
Yeah.
Before we move on. So how recent does it need to be, like, for it to be relevant? That's something that comes up a lot when I'm screening candidates. My clients want somebody who, and I think this will tie into what you're about to say next, of the bullet points and have they done what I need them to do? Yeah. A lot of times candidates are like, well, I did that 5 years ago, or I did that in my first job that was
Mhm.
10 years ago, or maybe I was in a startup 10 years ago. Like, how recent does it need to be in order for it to be relevant for you?
Yeah, so there's a general rule for me is like in the last 3 to 5
3
years.
to 5. That's, yeah,
Um,
that's a good rule of
but
thumb.
I will say if there is sometimes if most of their experience is startups throughout their entire career,
Okay.
then I will be more lenient on how recent it is because you have
Yeah.
so much experience at startups that it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's recent or not.
Okay.
This is another place, by the way, where getting acquired is a really nice thing to put on a resume because, like, you could be working at
It's been through a
IBM
merger and
because you
acquisitions.
got acquired by
Yeah.
IBM, and that's,
Yeah.
like, a good thing to put on a resume because then I'm like, "Oh, not only you have startup experience, you got acquired." Oftentimes, when you are acquired, that company lets you still operate like a startup
Mhm.
on that team. And so that's a really good indicator to me that even though you're working at IBM or you're working at Microsoft, that actually you do have recent startup experience.
Yep. Yep. That's a great point. And I also have clients oftentimes who are anticipating mergers and acquisitions, and they want to
Mhm.
hire candidates who have been through mergers and acquisitions
Oh,
and
interesting.
can handle the integrations of technology, as needed. So yeah, that's another great reason to put that on there. So yes, it sounds, just to summarize what you're saying, it sounds like for relevant experience that you're looking for, whether that's relevant startup experience or relevant experience in the types of companies that you're hiring for, or relevant experience to what the job entails. It
Mhm.
needs to either be recent or it needs to be significant across the span of your career in order to feel comfortable that you'd be able to jump right into it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off though. You're about to talk
No,
about
you're
looking at
totally
the
fine.
bullet points, I think.
Oh, yes, then I look at the bullet points and
Those
then I'm just
matter.
looking for, like, for a thing that comes to mind is senior engineer. I'm looking for, like, have they, like, led the launch of a feature?
Okay.
Have they, like, led a large technical project with multiple engineers? Um, I will say
That's so
actually
important to say. Like, that's such an important call out, because, like, I cannot tell you the number of senior engineers who I talk to who have done those things, but they don't explicitly write it out as a bullet point in their resume.
I was gonna
They
say
just
actually
are
most
great
resumes
resume
don't.
writers.
Well,
Yeah, most
actually
resumes don't.
they don't, and that's what's interesting, and this is like why and this is maybe weird advice. If you're really looking for a job and you need one now, this is kind of weird advice to give. So I like to own that. But if you're looking, but I like it when people put the things that they liked to do at that job on their resume. Like you
Mhm.
only, in my opinion, you should really only have like 3 to 5 bullet points per job because I'm not going to read your whole resume.
Preach.
If there's 10 bullet points, I'm sorry. I'm not going to read. I have 100 resumes to read a day. I'm not going to read, War and Peace 100 times. So that's another, like, just pro tip is, like, please for like 3 to 5 bullet points per job.
Yeah.
I will say that is a personal preference.
Yeah.
I've noticed some cultural differences there where different
Yep.
cultures will have longer resumes.
Yep.
And so that's definitely something I'm aware of. And it's, like I said, it's a personal preference. So it kind of depends on the culture of the company that you want to be hired in.
It's a personal preference, but there is also some truth, that as human beings, we only have a certain amount of attention span. And thanks to social media and TikTok, our attention spans are getting shorter and smaller. And
Mhm.
so I used to be a big advocate of, like, I love your 2-page resume. I love your 3-page resume. But now I'm like, my attention span really only allows me to thoroughly read one page. So the 3 to 5 bullet points would really help somebody keep it to one page. And I've seen people are like, well, I have 10 years of experience, but I've seen some stellar senior and staff level engineers and managers do this, where they can make a really tight 1-page resume that
Yeah.
succinctly gets to the point of what they did in each of their roles. So I think that's great advice, and that's not going to be everybody's personal preference, and that's
Mhm.
okay. But I think
Yep.
it's a good strategy for sure.
Yeah. So then I look at the bullet points and I'm looking for, yeah, do they have relevant experience? I will say this is the part where I will still pass people through, even if they don't necessarily say that they have that, because to
I
your
was going to
point,
ask you.
almost no engineers actually put the fact that they led a project on
Right.
their resume. They
Right.
usually say, like, I don't even know, like,
Usually they say
built this feature that does a thing, and then but it doesn't explain, like, what was my role in the project.
correct.
And so I just sort of have to assume by their titles that they led it,
Yeah.
but they don't usually say that. So this is the part where, like, I'm digging in, and then at this point I might be looking for, Yeah. Did they launch stuff that seems impactful? Did they work on stuff that seems impactful to the business? But this is where it gets a little bit more wishy-washy. And I find that kind of frustrating because like they write all this stuff on their resume and I don't find most of the bullet points particularly useful.
But I like that you give people, you're like, okay, this seems to be on the right track. It's worth a conversation.
Exactly.
I like that you're going into it that way because you're hiring for good engineers, not good resume writers. And in a perfect world, the Venn diagram would be a circle, but it is not. And it is just two different things. It's two different skill sets. Being able to write a good resume is different than being able to be a strong engineer. But I mean, that's why we're having this conversation, is that folks that are on the job market, there are some clear ways they could make their resume very much stand out to you if they were to apply.
Yeah. And then what was I going to say about the bullet points? Oh yeah. I was going to say, actually, I think to me, looking at someone's LinkedIn resume with no information per job is actually almost as useful as reading them.
Do you always go to people's LinkedIn? That's a good question.
Not always, because I don't always have enough time. If I have a resume, I'll look at
if you're going to invite them to an interview, would you go look at their, is that kind of the threshold of like, if we're extending them an invitation to interview, I will check out their LinkedIn beforehand?
It's a good question. It only depends, because I'm interviewing so much. I don't think I always look at their LinkedIn. I think if I get their LinkedIn instead of a resume, then I'll look at their LinkedIn.
Yeah,
but if I have the resume, I'll look at their resume.
The resume is first. Okay.
The resume is first because they gave it to me. Like, I should read it.
This is what they have elected to show us. This is their opt-in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I'll only go to their LinkedIn if I'm like, oh, I don't really know. Like, do they have this experience, but it's not on their resume? Maybe I'll go look at their LinkedIn. Maybe they do have this experience on their LinkedIn, or like they have this technology that we really need.
Yeah.
That's
if they have it as one of their LinkedIn skills, like, does that even mean anything? Like, to me, I'm like, every engineer lists every single language and technology under that skills section.
Yeah, I've only actually used this for really specialized skills, not like Java or like SQL.
Everybody has
whatever.
those.
Yeah.
On everybody's page.
I don't look for those on LinkedIn. It's like a good example is we just recently hired a machine learning engineer, and specifically we are looking for expertise in reinforcement learning, which is a type of machine learning, and it's very niche. And so no one has it on their LinkedIn unless they've done it.
They've actually used it. That's good.
Yeah, because nobody knows about it unless they've actually
they wouldn't know to tag it if you haven't used it. Okay, I like that. That's good. What about cover letters? Is there still a thing that people are expected to do and need to do in the field of software engineering?
I don't think it's expected. I almost never get cover letters. I get maybe one cover letter every like 100 probably even less often than that.
Does that make you feel like, oh, this person, I should interview them because they did a cover letter?
Not necessarily. It depends. I will read their cover letter first, and because that feels like that's what they want me to do. Yeah. So I'll read their cover letter first, because one way that people use cover letters in a really positive way is if they know that they're missing a skill set on their resume, but they are super excited about the role, or they know that there's like a weird gap on their resume they want to explain, then I want to do them the courtesy of reading their cover letter first, because my assumption is that they're sending me their cover letter because they want me to read it first. So I read their cover letter first if they send one, and then I look at their resume. And it's not like a shoe-in situation if they write a cover letter. Okay.
But what I hear you saying is it's not a waste of time. You do read them, and it could be a great opportunity for people to explain extenuating circumstances or, ways that they feel strongly about the position and how they line up, even if it's not obvious on paper. They're just giving themselves giving you more context to their experience, which I think is great.
Yeah, I do read them. I will say again, if it's like a 2-page cover letter, I am going to be annoyed.
That would be a lot. I don't know that I think I have gotten some of those sometimes.
Yeah, if it's a very long cover letter, I'm a little annoyed. I'm like, why did you do this?
I'm also sad that that's a lot of time that they spent that maybe they didn't need to do. So I'm trying to think of anything else I would ask specifically about resumes. You've looked at the bullet points, titles, dates, and time spent in each roles. Walk me through how you, as a VP of engineering, view some of these other sections? Like I want to talk about skills sections. Do you look at that? Is that, or are you just more focused on the bullet points of like what they actually do in this job?
I'll look through the skill sections. It's usually just like a list of all the technologies they've worked
Right.
with. That's like super fast for me to look at. So I'll definitely look at it.
Right.
It depends. So there are some roles that we're looking for really specific skills, and then that's great that it's on there. There are other roles where I'm not necessarily like I'm hiring such a senior engineer that I actually don't really care what technologies they've used in the past because I'm looking for a strong engineer, and a strong engineer is a strong engineer. It doesn't matter what language they've coded in.
Yes.
And so sometimes I
I'm
don't
gonna
really look at
copy
it.
that out and post that to LinkedIn. Just you saying
I
that
know.
because everybody needs to hear that.
No,
Listen.
it's a pet peeve of mine because I have so many hiring managers that I've worked with that report to me that I have to coach
Beat that
on
in their
this.
heads, I would assume.
Yeah, because they're like, well, it's just a neat, like, I want them to have Java. And I'm like, okay, let me describe a person that's like the perfect person for the role, but they have like experience in like C and Python and Go and not Java. Would you not hire them? And they're like, well, I guess, yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, but it's really difficult, actually.
Hiring managers that absolutely wouldn't, that they would say they need to, and I'm like, this person's the best person I've talked to. But if they don't have that one specific language, it's a no-go. And that's so hard. Like, do you feel like you've faced that in your own career trying to break into roles, or were you lucky to come across hiring managers who got it?
I ran into that in my own career, yes. And then honestly, the only way I got around that was like leaning on personal networks or things to try to get a role where I didn't have that specific experience.
And then you could get
So
it.
I run into that as well. And yeah, I don't. It's a really I want to own that the thing that I just said of like, I don't really care what technology. If you're senior enough, most hiring managers don't think that.
I would say Mary is the exception here, guys. I do not talk to any, like, I don't talk to hardly any hiring manager. I have one client that gets that, and they just want a strong senior engineer, full stack. And I'm like, okay, great. I can get you that, but I cannot get you one with this exact tech stack right now at this moment.
I will say though that more junior roles, like an associate engineer or like an engineer 2 or whatever, it's different because the skill set that they have at that point is very limited. And so I need one of those skills to be the actual language. But more senior roles, I don't look at specific language.
That's good to hear. So skills section. What about education section? I don't know if I have a question here about the like writing of the section, although I have been asked before if it should go at the top or the bottom of the resume. I don't know if you have any opinions there.
My hot take, which is, by the way, again, unpopular, I don't actually look at it.
Okay. Well, that is also rare because I've had a lot of hiring managers who they're like, they have to have the computer science degree.
My hot take is I don't actually think computer science degrees are necessary to be good at being a software engineer. As a matter of fact, and I will say this, some of the best engineers I've ever worked with are not CS majors. They're like classics majors or like college dropouts or like whatever. Like I actually, this is another hot take that I say once again is not typical. I know that there are a lot of people. It is becoming less common though. I will say that it used to be much more common that you had to have a college degree, and it's becoming less common now. As a requirement. I will say though that like if it's a certain college, then I'm like, which I don't usually look at the education section, but in case I notice a particular college, I'm like, oh, cool, that person went to so-and-so school. And like sometimes there's like a little connection where I'm just like, I knew someone who went to that school and they were really nice though. I don't know, but it's like not, but it's not like but it's not like I don't look at what their degree was in. I don't care. Personally, and so for me, I would put the education section at the bottom. Now that being said, there are specific roles, like especially, I will say at my current company, we are looking for one of our special skill sets that we're looking for is like somebody who has like research experience on database performance. And that can require a PhD. It doesn't have to, but it can. And so there's sometimes certain specific skill sets. If you have like a really specialized skill set and you have a PhD, like that's important to put on there. I don't know if it matters if it's at the top or not, because like in my head, I still just scan. I don't know why, but I'm just used to scanning down to the bottom for anything education related.
Yeah, yeah. I have recently flipped on this. Like I keep flip-flopping back and forth. I used to list mine at the top,
Hmm.
and I think it's still at the top of my resume. But again, I'm not an engineer, so I'm in a different
Yeah,
field. So it's a
I,
little
I
different
I don't
depending
think
on industry.
yeah, I don't think it matters to me because I'm used to seeing it at the bottom. So if it's at the bottom, then that's where I'll find it.
If it's
But
a
if it,
one-page resume, it really doesn't matter because your eye is going to scan the entire page.
yeah,
But when it's like a multiple-page resume, it's like
that's
I might not
true.
get to that
Then you
third or
might not
fourth
get
page where that
that.
education is listed at the bottom.
But I will say, if I'm looking for a specific degree, then I will go find it on the resume.
True, true.
Otherwise, I don't care and I'm not going to look for it.
That's a good point. Um, is there anything else you can think of that you do or do not like to see on resumes, like common pitfalls that people can watch out for?
And we already talked about really long resumes. I will say I really don't like those. Once again, I know it's a personal preference. And I want to own that some people are not humans reading your resume. Some of them have like an automated
Hmm.
system that's looking at resumes, and then they're looking for keywords, and then you just want to cram as many keywords as you possibly can right onto that resume so that they get noticed. And so I think like if you're applying to a larger company that's more likely to have like a resume scanning situation, then you can make your resume longer if you want to add more keywords. But for
Hmm.
me personally, if like I personally look at every resume, and I don't like it when they're long. So not making them like 3 pages, like 2 pages is fine. 3, 4, 5. I've seen 10-page
Oh
resumes.
yeah,
Uh, I don't like
16
that.
pages. I've seen it. It's a lot.
That's the only thing I really care about. Oh, I mean, like sometimes people's formatting is confusing, and I
I was
can't
about to ask if you
actually.
had any formatting pet peeves.
It's not just like it's mostly just like if I'm confused when I look at it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
wait, was that role for this company or this other
yep,
company? What was your title? I'm confused. Like, that's the only thing I care about. And it's not that I care about the formatting in a particular way. I just like I need to understand
yeah,
what roles you had when.
yeah.
And so that if it's confusing, then that's a problem. But I actually don't really have any other. I will say I know I have formatting pet peeves, but I don't let it impact whether or not I pick a resume
Yeah.
because that's like I don't like
It's just
what to
personal preference.
yeah, it's like I'm not hiring you for
You're
you to
not hiring for
form
your format,
your
your Word document skills.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you
I would
were a
say,
designer and you gave me a really
yeah,
disgusting resume, I'd be like, but like if you're
yep,
if you're a software engineer, I don't expect you to be a good designer.
yeah, yeah, for sure. My best advice to kind of hit at all of this is to have somebody proofread your resume and have them try to interpret it to make
Hmm.
sure that it's not confusing and make sure that the formatting doesn't make it hard to interpret. The other thing I usually recommend to people, and it's because I view resumes in the same process as you do, I look at job titles first. And so I
Hmm.
tell people to list that first. So I would say like senior software engineer,
Yep.
Keebo, and then the dates next to it and try to have that all in one line so their eyes can
Yes.
easily just scan that one by one. Because some people like to put the dates all the way over here and then the tabbing gets messed up. And
Oh,
sometimes the dates end up getting pushed to the next line. And I've seen
hmm.
it where just things get wonky and all out of order, especially if
Yeah.
you're sending it as a Word document instead of a
Yeah.
PDF.
Yeah, which I never do. I always send it as my resume as a PDF because I know that there are like ghosts in Microsoft Word and I'm like not interested in dealing with them.
They mess it all up. Yeah, send it as a PDF unless otherwise asked, because yeah, you just don't want it to get jumbled
Yeah.
up when it's transitioning between devices and people's systems.
Yeah.
Trying to think if there's any other formatting things. Um, I think I was always taught not to go any smaller than like a size 10.5 font. And like really if you need to go that small, like we might have to cut down some of your words. Like let's go to 11 size font. Um, but yeah, I think that's all super helpful to kind of understand how you as a hiring manager are looking at profiles, looking at resumes. I think a lot of the things you said are consistent across industry. So I think they're helpful for job seekers regardless of industry. But a lot of what you said, I think, is going to be super helpful for job seekers in software engineering, which is a lot of the folks I work with. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions in the chat as of right now, so we don't have any live Q&A pieces to answer. But is there anything we didn't talk about that you would want to highlight in terms of interviews and resumes? I think we
Yeah.
tackled all my questions.
Yeah, I think in terms of both, I'll talk about resumes and then interviewing, but in terms of resumes, I think I mentioned this before, but put things that you like to do on your
Oh
resume.
yeah, let's talk more about that.
And the reason why I say that is because I'm going to hire you to do the things that you put on your resume. So if you don't like the things that you're doing, don't put them on your resume. Put like your favorite things that you did at that job on your resume. So this is a little bit more geared towards non-technical roles, because usually technical roles, it's pretty straightforward what you did. Well, actually, that's not true. Like if you were a full stack person, but you actually don't like front end, then just like put back end stuff on your resume. Like, just, because I'm going to hire you for the things I see on your resume. And yeah, for managers, like if you're a manager and you love like process improvements, great, put that on your resume. If you hate process improvements, don't put process improvements on your resume, because then they're going to make you do it and you're not going to like it. So that's one thing. And then the other thing in the interview is, I think, and I want to own that I'm saying this from the perspective of a person who has a job. And like sometimes like you have to pay the bills and you just have to like get the job that you are given because you got to pay the bills. So I want to own this comes from a position of privilege. So feel free to ignore this advice is maybe what I'm trying to say. But I think people worry too much about what the right answer is in an interview instead of thinking about what is the answer that is like true to me. Because I want, like as a hiring manager, I want to hire somebody who's a good fit for the organization and is ultimately going to stay there. And so I'm trying to understand who they are as a person, and so that I can hire them into an environment that they're going to enjoy. And if they're not telling me the truth about who they are and what they enjoy, then they're going to hate the job probably. They may successfully trick me into hiring them and like, good job, but then they're going to hate their life because they're going to be doing something or they're going to be in a cultural environment they don't enjoy.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's something that like, I just like this is such a classic, just be yourself. What a classic thing, but like be yourself, be honest. I will say still though, even if you're being yourself and being honest, I still, when I'm interviewing, and I recommend for other interviewers, I really shy away from talking about negative things about past jobs, regardless of it was like a total dumpster fire, regardless of how bad it was. I generally still don't talk poorly about my past jobs.
For sure.
When I'm talking about being honest, it's like more honest about like who I am, what I care about, and like what I have done in my experience. Generally, like, don't be negative about past employers, because then then the person who's interviewing is thinking like, well, how long is it going to be before they hate us? How long is it going to be before they hate us too? Like, so that's just something to keep in mind.
It also comes across as a very external locus of control of like everything happens to me and I'm not impacting the environment around me. And I think a lot of hiring managers I hear, they want somebody who has more of an internal locus of control. And I think I'm using those terms correctly.
You are,
yes. Since I've been in my psych class, but you want to hire somebody who is looking at how can I make a positive impact on the workplace around me and the team around me versus the team and the organization are out to get me and they're the reason these projects failed XYZ. So
yeah, that's a big deal for me. And I agree. Internal locus of control is huge for me as a hiring manager, because startups are hard. And like,
especially in startups,
stuff is going to happen. Like you're going to have a deadline that's super important. And then like, I don't know, AWS is going to go down or something.
Microsoft will shut the world down.
or like the customer is going to be like, never mind, I don't like this. Goodbye. And then you're not going to close the the thing that you're trying to, so things happen, and like, things, sometimes you just like get a bad end of the stick, and like I need people who are able to roll with the punches and say like, well, that didn't feel good, but like, what could I do next time to prevent that from happening?
How can I learn from this situation? It goes back to being the open-minded and open to learn, open to failure. And that's a huge skill to cultivate. Do you ask that question in interviews? Like, tell me about a time you failed and what did you learn from it? Is that something that
this is the question I ask about the project of like tell me something that didn't go well and then what you would have done differently in hindsight. And that's sort of what I'm asking for. And that's like a very consistent question I ask, because I ask it in every single interview. I feel a little bit bad about this, but like I get to do this now because I'm the VP of engineering, but I always make sure that I ask that question. I
Yeah.
don't even have other interviewers do it, which is probably bad. But because it's so important to me, and
Yeah.
I get so much signal out of it, and that's the most important thing that I need. So
Are there any other questions you ask that you feel like are really enlightening in terms of people's personality? Because it is really hard on both ends, both the interviewer and the interviewee, to get a feel for who those people really are. And that's just something I'm always thinking about, is like, how can we better assess fit from both sides?
yeah, so usually, and these questions vary, but there's a question that I ask that's usually asking about something in their technical experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh yes, as a startup, now that as a person who's hiring in a startup, I almost always ask a question around when they had to deliver something on a short time frame, but they didn't have like direction or a bunch of process to support them and things like that. And I ask that almost every time, because I want to make sure that they can operate in a startup environment. Because I will say that I will talk to people who have not worked at a startup or have not worked at a startup recently, but I liked something else on their resume.
Yeah.
Or they work in an organization where it's a large company, but they work on like a team that operates like a startup.
Right.
So I can get signal on that. There's also some startups that are like, yeah, they're 50 people, but they don't actually operate like a startup. They still
For
operate like
sure.
an enterprise.
For
So I'm
sure.
trying to get a sense of like that. So, but that's trying to get at like, do they move quickly? And also, there's usually a question in there about a technical project they've worked on,
Okay.
and in some way or another. And I'm looking for like, are you interested and excited about the technologies you're working on? Do you understand things at depth? If I ask you a question about the technology, are you able to explain it? Or did you
Yeah.
only understand it at a surface level?
Yeah.
So that's another thing. It's like that question varies depending on what the role is and what experience we're looking for. But there's some question where I dive into a technical project they've worked on so that I can understand, did they like it? Do they really care about understanding it at a deep level? If I ask deeper questions, will they be able to answer?
I know that, I think you and I talked about this before, but what kind of questions do you ask to understand their tech depth, their technical depth, instead of asking them to define SOAP or REST principle? We talked about solid principles and SOAP, and instead of asking them to define some of these things, like, is there a more practical question? Like, is it as simple as saying, tell me about a time you applied, solid principles, and what was the outcome? Like, is it as simple as doing that?
So, I'm usually like the first interview. I'm usually the first interview or the last interview, actually.
Okay.
And because I'm either the hiring manager or I'm the manager of the hiring manager.
The executive call at the end.
Yeah. And so I'm asking, if I'm the first interview, then I'm going to ask the question I already mentioned around like some technical project to understand how in depth they could get. Now, beyond that, we will have technical interviews. And the technical interviews are very specific based on the skills that we need this person to have.
Right.
And so one example is like, we have a coding interview that's like, here's a snippet of code. It's broken, debug it. And the reason why we do that is because that's your life. Like, that's what your life is going to be like here. There's also just straight up like coding interviews where we say like, here's the thing, it's broken. Can you debug it? Can you talk through how you would build it in a more resilient, scalable way next time? We also have people just ask, like, tell me about your experience with CI/CD, or tell me about your experience with Terraform, and just, have them talk about like, it's more conversational.
Like,
we do have coding tests, like I said, but we also ask like questions about their experience. I have a personal thing where I try to shy away from take-home coding tests because I feel like it disadvantages people who are like taking care of family. They don't have time to be like, if you have 3 kids, like, you don't have time to do a 2-hour coding test outside of your 9-to-5 job and taking them to soccer practice and feeding them dinner and dealing with the fever they suddenly have. Like, you don't have time. So that's something I try to shy away from if I can. I try to do in-person coding tests. I do want to own, though, that I definitely get complaints. I've not gotten personally complaints, but I've heard feedback from people in the industry that they don't like in-person coding tests because it's really nerve-wracking, and especially like neurodivergent folks can get
I was
really.
gonna ask, yeah, if you had to make accommodations for neurodivergent folks before, because that's something that's come up in my work
Yeah.
too.
And once the company, like once I have enough space that I feel like I can take the time to do this, I actually try to offer either an in-person or a take home.
Right, give people the option. Like it seems like the most accommodating of like, if this one works better for you, do this one. If this one works better, do this one. But I recognize that's a lot of extra work on you.
Exactly. That's sort of like when I get to a stage that I don't feel guilty asking my team to do that, then I do it when I get to that point. But I always feel a little bit bad because they have so much they're trying to do to make them create like another coding exercise, one that's appropriate for take home, and then
take home, and then you have to have another interview step. I assume like someone's got to review the take home assessment, and then you probably want to speak to that candidate about the take home assessment. So it just creates another step in the process versus doing like a like we're going to meet and do the live coding during this block of time. So I get that.
Yeah. And there's one of those things where I agree it's an issue. And I think this is why I try to do it when we can. I'm usually working at like smaller startups or startups that are growing super fast or have like a lot going on or a lot of scaling issues. And so I try to find the right place when someone has a space to take a breath to say, okay, cool. Now can we like.
The fact that you're aware of it and thinking about it and trying to be as accommodating as you can is already way ahead of the curve. So I say great job. You're already taking these things into account. So I would say you're probably going to be, I think you would probably make anybody who would struggle with the in-person one feel more comfortable in that setting. So it would probably alleviate some of that stress for sure.
Yeah, we try to. That's the other thing is about, and I know this is a very internal thing, but like picking interviewers is super important.
That's a great call out for people who in leadership positions that are watching this, because that is a big part of making candidates have a better experience for sure.
Yeah. And then the last thing on interviews is like, please ask questions when you get the opportunity, because like you are interviewing this company too. Like it's not a one-way street. You want to know if you want to work there. And if they haven't given you, if you haven't gotten enough information about the company to know whether or not you want to work there from the questions that they've asked you and their demeanor, then you should ask questions. I always ask questions, of course. And I also, I will say once again, this is a thing that I can do at my level, but I ask to talk to people besides the interviewers. This is not something that I think is possible or approachable for like anyone at an IC level, unless you're like a staff or a principal or someone's like really gung-ho to hire you and really trying to poach you. But I think that there's some roles where you absolutely have the opportunity to talk to more people. If you want to get a feel for it.
Yeah. And if you're working with a recruiter, I know we've offered this to candidates before, like we've placed other people at this organization, so we can arrange for you to talk to the people that we've placed. So that's something to ask if you are partnered with a recruiter. They can maybe arrange that instead of the organization having to do that. So
yeah, I love that. When I'm at a larger org, I provide that opportunity. Actually, specifically when I'm at a larger org and I'm talking to a candidate that's from an underrepresented group in tech, I will say like, hey, also, if you want to, there's like sets of people that are from like your particular group that would be happy to talk to you if you want to reach out and just say like, what's it like to work here as a blank?
Yeah. I've always tried to speak to a woman at a company before I work there. If I'm interviewing with only men, I'm like, can I talk to a woman on the team? Because I want to speak to her about her experience, like on a phone call, offline, off the record. And that's usually very well received. So I think it's definitely a good thing to ask.
Yep.
Well, I know we're almost at like 55 minutes. This conversation flew by. I think we covered a lot of great stuff. Mary, I appreciate your time. This has been wonderful. I've learned a lot getting to hear from your perspective as a VP of engineering. Hopefully people find this session helpful as they're applying to jobs. If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat, put them in the comments. I will come back and look at these questions if the comments are made after the fact and get them filtered out to Mary if needed. But feel free to reach out to either one of us. Hope you don't mind, Mary, that I'm volunteering you out there. But reach out to us on LinkedIn. We'd love to help and connect in any way we can. But thanks again, Mary, for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.